Hello and a very warm welcome to Middle East Matters. I'm Sanam Shantier. Coming up on this week's show, Donald Trump's contentious executive order. It bans entry from 7 majority Muslim countries for 90 days and suspends all refugee arrivals for 120 days. We bring you the latest from those affected. Also, the World Bank releases a report on today's pressing challenges. The region's chief economist joins us on set with their solutions. Lastly, once the pulsing cosmopolitan heart of the Arab world, where is Alexandria today after several consecutive oppressive regimes and the Arab Spring? We start this edition of Middle East Matters with more controversy surrounding Donald Trump. Only 1 week into his presidency, and he's already set off a political and legal crisis after he signed an executive order dubbed the Muslim ban that temporarily holds the entire US refugee program and refuses entry to those from Iran, Iraq, Libya, Somalia, Sudan, Syria and Yemen for at least 90 days. The decree has set off massive protests across the country, as well as drawing condemnation from several of the 7 targeted nations. Alexander Hurst has the story.
Protection of the nation from foreign terrorist entry into the United States.
Signed and implemented with little review or delay, Donald Trump's executive order had an immediate human effect on the citizens of 7 Muslim nations who are now banned from U.S. soil. One of them is Nail Zayan, a Syrian who was turned away when he attempted to get on a plane to the United States.
I received my visa for reunification with my wife. My wife and my son already in USA, in Los Angeles. I received my visa on 27th.
Likewise, this Iraqi family was unable to board a long-awaited flight. Fuad Suleiman is a pharmacist who had spent 2 years getting the visas that were to be his family's ticket to the American dream.
I believe it's a terrible era in the United States, terrible era in the history of the United States. It's autocracy. As someone signs and effective immediately, what does this mean? It's just like Saddam Hussein's decisions.
This feeling of injustice is reverberating throughout the Muslim world, particularly in Iraq, whose parliament voted on Monday to follow Iran in applying a reciprocal ban on U.S. citizens.
We propose a motion for the application of reciprocity with the United States if the Americans do not go back on their decision, and this with the aim of preserving the prestige of the Iraqi state and the dignity of its citizens.
In addition, Iran's foreign minister said that Trump's executive order was a counterproductive gift to extremists and would only encourage terrorism against the United States. For many, it's the type of discrimination that feeds the recruitment messages of terrorist organizations and raises feelings of exclusion in Muslim communities.
These measures will transform America into a savage nation, and it could backfire and lead to exactly the kind of result its leaders are trying to prevent. America is a great country that respects human rights, but this decision will have a negative impact by labeling Muslims as terrorists.
Not all Muslim countries are subject to the ban. Egypt, Qatar, and Saudi Arabia are not blacklisted, even though 15 of the 19 September 11th hijackers were Saudi. Some see a curious coincidence at work. Donald Trump has business dealings in all 3 of those countries, as well as in Turkey and Azerbaijan. Nations also not targeted by the executive order.
Now, how can better governance and more effective policies support the Middle East as the region faces the most dire challenges, including a continued cycle of conflict, death and destruction, and of course the worst refugee crisis since World War II? Well, the World Bank has just released a report on these very issues, and to tell us more about that, we're joined by the chief economist of the Middle East and North Africa region, Shanta Devarajan. Mr. Devarajan, thank you very much for joining us on the show. Now, can you tell us exactly how this report came together?
Well, the World Bank does a World Development Report every year. So about 18 months ago, we chose the topic, governance and the law, because we thought that this was one of the more fundamental challenges for effective policies. And so we put together a team. They're pulled out from whatever other jobs they're doing for a year to write the report. they also undertake extensive consultations. And then 15 months later, the report is published.
Now, according to the report, policy can somehow help strengthen economy in some affected areas by conflict. Can you tell us more about that?
Well, I think more importantly, policies and better governance can help avoid the onset of conflict as well. I mean, if you take the Middle East region, for instance, and you look at the period before the Arab Spring, for a 10-year period, there was rapid economic growth, about 5 to 6% a year. There was reduction in poverty. And importantly, there was a reduction in inequality, which is already quite low. At the same time, we had revolutions all over the region and uprisings that have since turned into, as you said, widespread conflict. Now, why was that? Well, if you look a little bit more closely, there was a definite sense of exclusion that was due to poor governance. So you had political capture of the private sector by political elites in many countries, and we've documented them now in Egypt and Tunisia and places like that, which meant that the private sector was not creating enough jobs. And the public sector was not hiring people either, which meant that there was a very high rate of unemployment, the highest in the world. And young people in particular had double the rate of unemployment as the average. And this has led to a sense of exclusion that can lead some people to join terrorist groups, and certainly led them to rise up against their leadership.
Now, looking at the refugee crisis in particular, there are certain countries that are burdening this crisis more so than others. We're talking about Lebanon and Jordan. How can those countries, according to your report, be better supported?
Yes, there's no question that the impact of the refugee crisis is highest in the two neighboring countries. I mean, Lebanon has about 30% of its population now as refugees. That's the equivalent of the entire population of Nigeria moving to Europe, for instance. And the way you can help them is, again, coming back to creating jobs. When you talk to refugees, what you realize is they need food and shelter and so on. But if they don't have a job, they lose a sense of dignity. And that's extremely important if you want to preserve their welfare. So we can help them by creating an environment where Jordan and Lebanon can create more jobs. And that's one of the things that we're trying to do.
Lastly, Mr. Devarajan, one thing I can't get my head around is how the World Bank can actually secure peace today when key players like Tehran, Moscow and Ankara have sat round the table and they haven't been able to achieve that.
Well, the World Bank is trying to secure peace by working on the underlying causes of conflict, such as unemployment. But also, what we are working on, for instance, on Syria, is a plan for the reconstruction of Syria. Now, that will only be effective once there is peace. But if we can actually come up with a whole plan and actually raise some financing for it, and this is of the orders of tens of billions, if not hundreds of billions of dollars, that might induce some of the combatants to lay down their arms because they begin to see what are the benefits of peace.
Thank you, Mr. Devarajan, for joining us on Middle East Matters. Now it's time to take you to Alexandria, Egypt's second city and once considered the jewel of the Mediterranean. A large port city, it was home to a diverse blend of locals and foreign nationals and became the birthplace of Arab cinema. But after consecutive autocratic regimes and the Arab Spring uprising, the city has lost some of its lustre. What's left today of the once great city? Well, our team on the ground sent us this report.
For Alexander the Great, it was a dream to found the most remarkable city the ancient world had ever seen. But he would never live to see his dream become reality. The rise of Alexandria, a great metropolis that would take on mythic proportions. Basil Bena inherited Bena Films in Alexandria, the first Egyptian cinema company to make sound films.
My family arrived in Egypt at the start of the 20th century with the written authorization of the Ottomans. They were among the first naturalized Egyptian families in the 30s. My parents were the ones who started producing and distributing the first films in Egypt. They lived in the golden age of Egyptian cinema through the 60s.
The city continues to inspire artists from around the world. Gaetan Trovato is French. He spent 3 months in Alexandria directing a film using footage from the Bene family archives. His project was titled Before I Forget.
I wanted to work with the archives, to revive them in some way. I'm not necessarily interested in the colonial era, but in Egyptian identity. My wish is to pay homage to Alexandrians.
After World War II, amid decolonization and the rise of Egyptian nationalism, thousands of foreigners chose to leave the country, or were forced out. Teresa Cremissi, an Italian author, was born in Alexandria but left in 1956. She's returned to her city for the first time in 60 years.
It was a jewel of the Mediterranean, with its clean streets flocking with women wearing the latest fashions from Paris. That's not what it is anymore, but something still remains of this undying city.
6 years after the Arab Spring uprising, Egypt's economy is in shambles, with inflation in the double digits and nearly half of young people unemployed. But for a city that's been reinventing itself for more than 2,000 years, there's still hope that Alexandria can rise again from the ashes of civilization's past.
It's the most popular sport in the world, one that brings about cheers and chants and tears in equal measures, but one that hasn't been watched live in this war-ravaged city for years. The game comes after the army last month retook Aleppo's eastern neighborhoods, regaining control of the entire city. And fans were delighted to return to the stadium, despite having lost friends and family who had been killed or fled Syria during almost 6 years of conflict. Well, that's it for this week's edition of Middle East Matters. Don't forget to follow us on Twitter. Well, thanks for watching and do stay tuned to France 24.